From telling the U.S. Senate that he could take the internet down to shedding light on government and election insecurity. I'm Tonya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is Chris Wysopal. He is the co-founder and chief technology officer at CA Veracode. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
So what does CA Veracode do?
So we're an application security company. So you know all those mobile apps and web apps, by default, they're basically insecure. And because that's just part of the development process. So what Veracode does is we provide security testing for developers building applications so they can test it and secure the application before they put it out on the internet.
You have somewhat a notorious background that included telling the U.S. Senate that you could take down the internet in 30 minutes. Tell us about your start as a hacker.
Yeah, so in the mid-90s, when ethical hacking wasn't a profession, it was basically a hobby. It was something that was fun to do. I was a software engineer. In my day job, I wrote testing software. And then I had fun just taking apart other people's software and learning how it worked and learning how to find vulnerabilities in it, bugs that you could exploit to get it to leak data or take over someone's computer. And that was just a fun kind of hobby. I found other people who could do it, and it was just something that we did for fun. But at some point, we realized this has value to people. Like, people want to learn and understand what we're doing, and people would pay us to test their software or test their internet sites. And it just started to become something that became a profession. Breaking into people's websites went from something you did for fun to something you did for money. And with the permission of the people who own the website. So when I say for money, actually being employed.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification on that.
Yeah.
The 20th anniversary of Loft's testimony on Capitol Hill was actually this year. What progress in understanding security have we made since then? And can you single out an area that needs much more attention today?
Yeah, we know so much more today. Obviously, we've been learning for the last 20 years, but it's mostly because back in 1998, when we testified, most people had no idea how to build a secure computer system. They just had no idea. The major manufacturers, like Microsoft and the other big software companies, just didn't know how to build secure software. So we've really learned how to do it now. We've learned how to lock down systems, and the proof is out there. If you look at things like iOS, it costs $1 million for a jailbreak now. If you look at some of the bounties for bugs in Facebook or Google products, you could make $50,000. So these bugs are pretty rare. So in certain cases, we've learned how to build secure systems, but the problem is not everyone is paying attention. You have Internet of Things, you have new startups happening all over the place. So that's why we constantly are seeing data breaches and people are at risk. It's not because we haven't learned how to build secure systems. We're just not applying what we've learned to everywhere we're building. There's no building code. So it's as if there was no building code and 20% of the buildings were built well and 80% weren't, right? You'd be worrying about, am I in one of those buildings that's built well? Well, that's kind of the way it is with technology today.
How has government IT security evolved since your time at Loft?
So I still think the government lags behind some of the best practices I see out there in banks and finance, or the big tech companies, the big cloud providers. But they've gotten a lot better. Which I would say, when I first started looking at it, they were below average, and now I would sort of say they're average now. So I think it's gotten better, but there's still a long way to go. And I think the government could learn from some of the companies that are doing a good job securing their systems.
What should government agencies prioritize to strengthen their security posture?
Well, I think there's two things. I think the basics of, and this is what I tell everyone, is like you got to get the basics of good security hygiene right first. You got to have the basics, like you have to patch the systems that matter. You have to care about what software you're running. You have to use, two-factor authentication is another, good basic thing that you should do. But that's just the start. Like that's the baseline. You have to get there. What most businesses do that are secure is they really threat model, like who's attacking me, how are they going to attack me, what are they after, and then figure out how to use that information to secure the right things. I don't really see a lot of that kind of threat modeling behavior described when it's government systems. It's more just the good hygiene part, and I don't think there's some departments that aren't even doing that. So I think it's a combination of the two, and I think there's a lot of room to grow and get better.
Election security is a pretty hot topic right now. What isn't being talked about regarding this threat?
Yeah, I think the thing with election security is there's a big focus on the voting machines themselves, and there certainly are problems. We saw at DEF CON they had the voting machine village that showed that certain voting machines could be pretty easily hacked into, but that's not a scalable attack, right? That's something where you have to physically go and touch the voting machines because they're not connected to a network. So I worry more about all the systems that are connected to the internet, the voter registration systems, the places where the election results are tallied, the election management systems. I worry about the more complicated aspects of it than the voting machines, where there's a more complicated supply chain of software vendors that are involved, and there's just more people who touch and have access to those systems. I worry about a USB drive or rogue software getting onto those systems and basically changing the vote tally. So if you don't have a paper backup, that could cause a real problem if the vote tallies are changed.
Right now, each state is responsible for securing their own election systems. Is there any benefit from a security standpoint to, standardize the process and or technologies in the states?
Yeah, so I think standardizing could definitely help. There's one aspect of it is, it's sort of security by obscurity. If there's like 100 different voting systems, then the attackers would have to learn all of those systems and have specific attacks for each of the different systems. I think in this case, the attackers probably would put the effort in to do that, and I think they probably are putting the effort to do. So I think it ends up being harder for the people securing the systems because now you have to have 100 different sets of guidance, 100 different understandings of good configurations and that. So I like to simplify things. I like to just have, pick one or two really, strong systems and rally around, understanding the weaknesses in those systems and understanding how to secure them, than trying to sort of understand a mishmash of many dozens of systems.
Sounds like our government and our election system should be consulting with you, Chris. Chris Wysopal, co-founder and chief technology officer at CA Veracode. Thank you so much for joining us and shedding some insight on this. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about the work that you guys are doing, how can they do that?
I think the best way is just on Twitter. Most of the things I talk about, I tweet links to. So my Twitter handle is WeldPond, which is WELDPOND.
Sounds good. And if you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or go to my website, tonyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. Thanks for watching.